based on what people know, or maybe in this case don't know. How does that affect how this office proceeds?
That's how it happens. If this case drags along unnecessarily, I can tell you it will not be because of the Manhattan DA's office, and I'm not saying that as being biased. The defendant has a right to make motions and after motion, not frivolous motions, but motions. This judge, Judge Merchan, is a no-drama judge. He is very fair and reserved. He will not allow any unnecessary delays. He'll allow necessary delays, but not unnecessary delays. So every time there's a court appearance, the district attorney's office will have their prosecutors there, and they will make whatever record in the courtroom. So it will be clear that if this case is moving along, they are doing everything they're supposed to be doing, and if there's a delay, it has absolutely nothing to do with what they're doing.
Catherine, great to have you along with us today. We'll ask you to stand by as I turn back to our panel here. And Laura, let's begin this conversation now. But what might be in this indictment? We have heard that it could be up to 30. We don't know how it will be broken down, and if there'll be any surprises, things that have not been reported.
That's one of the big questions we all have once we actually see the document: is what is their theory of the case, and is there anything there that's new? Is there any fresh evidence? You know, we understand they subpoenaed a number of different records. They had a number of different witnesses in front of this grand jury. That's all under seal. It's all supposed to maintain a secret process to protect the integrity of the investigation. And so I'm looking for, in that indictment, is there anything other than a falsification of business records charge? Is there a conspiracy-related charge? Is there banking? Is there tax fraud? We know that his former chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, actually pled guilty to tax fraud and falsifying business records, the very issue that we think is at the center of this case. And so we need to see sort of how do they explain the theory of the case and what's their legal hook. We've talked for days about how normally this would be a misdemeanor charge, right? How are they going to elevate it to a felony? What's their hook there? You need to have the intent to commit or conceal a second crime in addition to the falsification. So what's their theory for how you get there?
Would there be a conspiracy, perhaps, Judge?
There could be. We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. But if that's the second crime, maybe that's their hook.
All right. Danny, what are your thoughts? We don't know exactly when we're going to see this document.
Reportedly, it's going to be related to the Stormy Daniels hush money payments. But I just can't believe that that would be the only thing that they would base this historic indictment on is those hush money payments, because they're problematic. This case is going to be problematic. That's not just my opinion. That was the opinion of one volunteer district attorney, Mark Pomerantz, who left the DA's office and this team out of frustration with the way things were going. And in his book, you see not only his position, which is that Trump should be indicted, but other people in the office pushing back and arguing that he shouldn't be indicted. And in his book, just to give you an idea, this Stormy Daniels avenue, this hush money payments, this was called the zombie case because it died. It was reanimated. It came back to life. It shuffled along. Then it died again. This is very promising. There are other cases, other potential charges that we may see. For example, Trump's statements of financial interest or condition that he submitted to banks in order to secure loans, or that maybe he deflated the value of his properties when it came time to pay taxes. We may see tax charges. We may see all of these coming, or even related to the Stormy Daniels hush money payments. But I have to say, and I'm probably in the minority, I would be surprised if the only thing in this indictment is 30-plus counts that are related only to Michael Cohen's paying off of Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump's reimbursing of Michael Cohen. There are a number of different challenges that case will have, and I would be surprised if the Manhattan DA's office didn't turn to some other counts, other charges, other theories of responsibility.
The former president's own attorneys have referenced the book that Danny is talking about here by somebody who used to work on this case and on the series of cases in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as a way of pre-budding legally and previewing the legal defense they will put up. There's also another way that they're going to try to go after this case, and that attack the credibility of somebody who has been a central witness, who has appeared under this grand jury we know repeatedly, and that is Michael Cohen, who is considered a kind of fixer, the former attorney for former President Trump. You have seen now for weeks, ever since, frankly, even before word of this indictment started to come down, the former president's team, his attorneys, his legal team go after Cohen's credibility, go after the fact that Cohen, they say, is a proven liar, and his word should not be trusted. So we are already seeing some of the preview of the legal defense, even if it is, Danny, to the point that you're making, only related to these alleged hush money.
Let me just direct you guys. We just had a picture of there. That is the. I think we told you about a camera that was going to be available in the hallway. Jonathan Dienst is here. Jonathan, the former president will have to pass through in front of this lens.
So they'll pass through, but the courtroom, I believe, is behind those blacked-out windows. So he's going to come out of the elevator bank, make a quick turn, and go into the back corner courtroom if that is still the 15th floor courtroom that they are using. So as you see, that is the pool camera that has been positioned front and center for all news media to share. And so it'll be a very quick shot of the former president going into that courtroom.
If he wants to say anything, he could walk to that stanchion.
He can, and we were told they are preparing for that possibility, but we are hearing from the defense side that there is no plan for him to speak at the courthouse, that they plan to leave right away, get to LaGuardia Airport. He wants to get back to Florida as quickly as possible to prepare for his primetime 8:15 p.m. speech, announcement, press conference to talk about what has happened today.
All right, let me ask you about these indictments and the way that they are made available to not only the counsel but to the media. You've covered a lot of trials in that courthouse. How does that typically work? How long before we might see something and have it in our hands?
Really, right now, because of the way the judge has restricted access, and the way the court works, you have to get hard copies from the clerk's office after the hearing. It takes a while. So we're at the mercy of the district attorney's office right now to email us the hard copy of the charging document, which traditionally in Manhattan is a very basic listing of the charges with a paragraph or two of explainers. I would expect in this case a more detailed indictment, but I don't expect something that we often see out of the federal courts where you have an indictment that's 80 pages long with extensive detail of the alleged crimes. So we are at the mercy regarding the email. The folks in court aren't going to know because they're most likely not going to read the indictment out in open court. There'll be some highlights of the main charges. There'll be some back and forth on the calendaring of the next court hearing, which is probably in May or June, as the whether there'll be any admonishment from the judge regarding public statements regarding this case, all to be determined. And Garrett will be in the courtroom. Melissa Russo of WNBC will be in the courtroom. There are 60 seats for reporters in the actual courtroom, 200 seats in the overflow rooms. But it's going to be a little while before we see the actual document. We're at the mercy of the DA, and when they press send on the email or post on
or scan it.
Or scan it.
If they have a scanner in the courthouse.
That massive sigh you just heard, by the way, all my legal friends here, like, how long?
Checking,
really?
we don't have it yet.
Right. It's just not the New York court system, the way it's set up. It's just not, it's not PACER. It's not the federal system or some of the other state systems. It is a bit slower, and because the judge has not allowed cameras in and he's not allowing any sort of communication from the courtroom itself during the hearing, we're going to have to wait till after the hearing is over to hear from the reporters who were there to tell us what happened, and then we're going to have to wait for the DA to email out, and usually they email it as soon as the hearing ends. So that's when I would expect the email to come, because to date, the district attorney's office has been following what he does in other cases, he's doing in this case, which is, I'm not unsealing early, even though there's enormous public interest, even though the court was on standby the day the indictment came by, that they were willing to entertain a motion from the DA to unseal right away. The DA said, no, I am going to handle this like any other case, and they wait until the defendant appears in court. Then literally the unsealing, the envelope gets handed to the judge and or the clerk, and it gets taken out, and now it is public, and that's when this document first becomes public in that Manhattan courtroom.
Obviously, he is getting special treatment. Is that a requirement of security, or were there negotiations between his lawyers and the court or Secret Service or whomever?
Look, he is the former president of the United States. He is surrounded by Secret Service agents. So is he a flight risk? He's the most recognizable man on the planet. So there's no need for a mugshot at this time. Whether they changed their mind when he came in, and the capability we were told was put in place. Originally, we were told it may not have been in place. It was made to be put in place in case they changed their mind. But in terms of special treatment, much of what we're seeing today is for the security reasons associated with this case, both for, again, the president and the judge and the DAs and the surrounding community, to make that building a fortress, to make sure it is safe and secure for everyone involved, and to get the president in and out, former president in and out as quickly as possible. So that is the logic, certainly, behind the court officers, the Secret Service, the NYPD, and everything you've seen in terms of, quote, special treatment. The logic, again, you have to go back. There have been a ton of threats, unsubstantiated, but a ton of threats associated with this case so far.
I want to bring in, if I can, former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Carol Lam. Carol, good to have you. Let's talk about this, what we expect to be, almost over 24 counts against the former president. Is there a strategy here that we're not seeing just based on that information?
I think there could be, and I agree completely with Danny that I would be very surprised to see this indictment limited to just the hush money payments. The hush money payments in themselves may not actually be illegal, but it's all the falsification that goes around it. Up to this point, in doing the grand jury investigation with the grand jurors and forming the indictment, it has been the advantage to the DA, because the DA can take all of the information that the DA knows and can craft the indictment in such a way that as much evidence as possible is going to come in at this trial. So if a conspiracy is charged, if tax fraud is charged, if the McDougal hush money payment is charged in addition to the Stormy Daniels, enables the DA's office, the prosecutors, to bring in as much evidence as they want if it relates to charges that are actually in the indictment. One of the most important things that a judge has to rule on is what evidence comes in at trial. And if these events are actually charged in the indictment, if a broader case is charged, then the DA will have more latitude to get more evidence in at trial.
What are your thoughts on state tax charges? Is that the likely one that we would see that we haven't really talked about?
I think it's very likely that state tax charges are going to be brought in this case, and here's why. Because if state tax charges are brought, it moves away from these campaign finance charges that everybody is saying is unprecedented and uncharted waters. Prosecutors do not like uncharted waters. They like to know the guardrails around the things that they charge in their indictment. They want to know what courts of appeals are going to say about the way they charge the case. Tax charges, as we saw in the Trump Organization trial, are well charges. People understand tax evasion. You saw it in the movie The Untouchables, go after them on the tax charges. So if there's good evidence that Donald Trump made instructions that impacted the filing of false tax returns, see those charges in this indictment.
Let me bring Hallie back into the conversation. Hallie, a lot of folks quickly, mostly on the right's defense, based on, a little
what
bit.
Was publicly reported.
What was publicly reported, which, regrettably was not as much as we would have liked to have seen. If these charges turn out to be a bit more serious, does that change the calculus here?
I'd be surprised to see that, Lester. I mean, who knows, right? But I think given what we have seen, if past is any precedent, there is a real sense, and I will tell you, having spoken with a lot of Republicans here over the last series of days, that this almost feels kind of personal, that there is a sense, even among rivals of Donald Trump, members of the Republican Party, who may not want to see him get the nomination, certainly don't want to see him get the nomination, somebody else, but who do feel like he really is being politically persecuted here. Now, we have to say that Alvin Bragg has pushed back on that, and the prosecutor's office has said, of course, that is not the case here, but that sense is real, given the person and the district bringing the case. Remember, and I want to just remind people, this is not the only investigation. This is not the only legal trouble, potentially, that there is another investigation into him in Georgia and Fulton County as it relates to his push to try to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election there. There is also a special counsel case as it relates to what he did leading up to and on January 6th, as well as, and this is important, those classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. And I think there is a sense that, and you're seeing some of these investigations here on screen, with, by the way, new developments, even just in the last couple of hours on the special counsel case, with a setback for the former president's legal team here, losing an appeal to get certain aides to testify. The classified documents case is one to watch as well, because these are Republicans who are running against him or who plan to run against him who have made a case about, let's say, national security, the importance of protecting intelligence. I think point being, other cases may be harder for Republicans to defend. But in this instance, unless there is some big bombshell, unless Danny is right and there is this sort of thing that nobody expects that comes out, it is hard-pressed to see how, for example, Ron DeSantis or Mike Pence walk back the criticism that they've already very clearly and in some instances repeatedly laid out against Alvin Bragg in this investigation.
All right, let's bring in our colleague Kristen Welker now. She's outside the courthouse. Kristen, you have some thoughts about this too, about these gathering legal storms over the former president.
And it has to do with the B word, Lester, baggage. I spoke to a number of Republicans who said, look, if the former president does face more indictments in those investigations that Hallie just laid out, you might start to see the conversation shift to that term baggage. Remember what the strategy was of Mr. Trump in against his rival at the time in the general election, Hillary Clinton. He made the case that she just had too legal baggage to be president. So I think the question becomes, and some of the conversations are starting to swirl around whether that type of argument